The Real-Life Shawshank, the Dannemora prison escape, the blueprint of escape. Before you dive into this one, hit that subscribe button, because once you hear this story, you'll question every prison you've ever believed was secure. It began in the frozen north of New York, at Clinton Correctional Facility, a massive, gray, maximum security fortress built in the 1800s. Locals called it Dannemora, and to them, it was more than a prison. It was a legend, a place where killers were sent to disappear behind bars forever. But in June 2015, that illusion shattered. Inside those walls were two men who refused to be forgotten: Richard Matt, 48, a lifelong manipulator, and David Sweat, 34, quieter but every bit as cunning. Both serving life sentences for murder. Both smart enough to turn the system into their playground. Matt had charm, the kind that drew people in and made them forget who he really was. He painted, cracked jokes, even sketched portraits for guards. Sweat was different, methodical, disciplined, the planner. Together, they made a dangerous combination: charisma and calculation. In any other place, they might have killed each other. But in Dannemora, they found purpose. A way out. That opportunity came through Joyce "Tilly" Mitchell, a 51-year-old prison employee who worked in the tailor shop. Married, soft-spoken, and well-liked, she seemed the least likely person to be caught up in something dark. But Matt noticed her first, her friendliness, her curiosity. He began to talk to her during work hours, making her laugh, complimenting her clothes. He knew how to find a weakness. Soon, Sweat joined in. He wasn't as forward as Matt, but he played his part: polite, respectful, careful. Together, the two inmates began to weave a web that Tilly didn't see coming. By 2014, she was smuggling in small things: cookies, notes, even tiny screwdrivers hidden in meat. It seemed harmless. Until one day, Richard Matt asked for something bigger: a hacksaw blade. What started as an emotional connection had become a criminal conspiracy. The plan was simple, in theory. Sweat and Matt would cut through the back of their cells, crawl through a maze of pipes, break open steam tunnels, and emerge outside the prison walls. A plan that seemed impossible, unless someone on the inside helped. Tilly provided tools. She smuggled in frozen hamburger meat stuffed with contraband, passing it through metal detectors under the pretense of lunch for the inmates. And no one questioned her. She'd worked there for years. In late May 2015, the cutting began. Sweat's cell had a steel backplate, nearly an inch thick. He used hacksaw blades, light bulbs for heat and patience, working for hours every night, masking the sound with music and television. He cut a hole just big enough to squeeze through, leading to a dark maintenance corridor behind the cells. It took months. Every bolt, every screw removed with care. Every sound muffled. And as the hole grew, so did the bond between the three of them. Tilly began to talk about running away, about meeting in Mexico. Matt promised her a new life. But behind his grin, he had no intention of sharing it. By June 5, 2015, the night of the escape, everything was ready. Matt and Sweat replaced the backplates, cleaned up the debris, and placed dummy heads made of plaster and hair from the barber shop on their pillows to fool the guards. That night, as rain tapped against the steel roof, they crawled into the darkness. Down the narrow pipe system, past decades of rust, heat, and steam. Sweat led the way. Matt followed, carrying tools. When they reached the outer wall, they cut through a steel pipe and emerged into the freezing air beneath the prison's shadow. At 5:30 a.m., guards made their rounds, and found both cells empty. The dummies were still there, smiling faintly in the dim light. Panic erupted. Alarms blared. The prison locked down. Helicopters filled the sky. Dannemora had just lost two convicted murderers. But the real shock came hours later, when investigators realized something worse: the men didn't just escape. They had help. And when they opened the locker belonging to Joyce "Tilly" Mitchell, what they found changed everything. The manhunt and the mistress. The morning after the escape, Clinton Correctional Facility erupted into chaos. Sirens howled across Dannemora, echoing off the cold prison walls. Officers flooded every hallway, searching for any sign of the two missing inmates. Richard Matt and David Sweat, gone without a trace. The impossible had happened. Two convicted murderers had broken out of a maximum security prison surrounded by 40-foot walls and armed guard towers. The warden stood in disbelief as state police swarmed the perimeter. One question repeated through every radio frequency: how did they get out? Within hours, the New York State Police launched a manhunt unlike anything the state had ever seen. Over 1,500 officers, K-9 units, and helicopters swept through the Adirondack wilderness. Roadblocks stretched across miles of countryside. The FBI joined in. The Canadian border was alerted. Everyone was looking for two men, one charming, one quiet, both desperate. Inside the prison, detectives began to retrace every step. Every gate. Every logbook. And every person who had contact with the two inmates. It didn't take long for one name to stand out. Joyce Tilly Mitchell. The investigators had found a locker filled with strange items, small tools, clothing, and an envelope containing maps of New York and Canada. But it was what they discovered in her interview that broke the case wide open. Tilly tried to stay calm. She told the officers she had no idea what happened. But when they pressed harder, her story cracked. She admitted she knew both men, and yes, she had been friendly. But she denied helping them escape. Her eyes darted around the room, trembling with guilt. Finally, one detective leaned in and asked, "Joyce, did you ever bring them something you shouldn't have?" Her silence answered before her lips did. She had smuggled in hacksaw blades, screwdrivers, and chisels, hidden in frozen hamburger meat she delivered to the workshop. She had been planning to pick them up the night they escaped, to drive them south toward freedom. But she backed out at the last minute. She said she got scared. That single decision may have saved her life. While investigators pieced together her confession, Matt and Sweat were already miles away. They had vanished into the vast Adirondack wilderness, using stolen clothing, canned food, and makeshift camping gear. For days, the forest swallowed them whole. Locals reported hearing noises in barns. Food went missing from hunting cabins. Each tip sent swarms of officers and bloodhounds deeper into the woods, only to find nothing but empty beer cans and footprints in the mud. The media dubbed it the Real-Life Shawshank. Every major network covered the manhunt around the clock. Reporters compared their escape to the legendary 1994 film. But this was no Hollywood script, it was a manhunt funded by fear. At one point, police thought they had them cornered. A hunter spotted two men moving through the trees near the small town of Owl's Head. Officers moved in quietly. But when they reached the campsite, the fire was still warm, and the men were gone. It was as if the forest was protecting them. Meanwhile, Joyce Mitchell's quiet suburban life crumbled. Her husband, Lyle, who also worked at the prison, was humiliated. The town turned against her. Reporters camped outside her home, snapping photos of her in handcuffs as she was led into court. The charges: promoting prison contraband, criminal facilitation, and official misconduct. But the question haunted investigators: why would a 51-year-old woman risk everything for two killers? The answer was in the letters. Love notes, written in Richard Matt's hand, full of charm and manipulation. He promised her a life in Mexico. He called her his angel. In truth, Matt had been using her from the start. He never intended to keep her alive once they were free. Police later discovered he had told Sweat privately that they would ditch her car and move on as soon as they escaped. The woman who believed she'd found love had been nothing more than a tool. But while Mitchell sat in a cell, the two fugitives continued to move north, closer to the Canadian border, exhausted, hungry, and increasingly reckless. Then, nearly 3 weeks after their escape, a single gunshot in the quiet woods of Malone, New York, changed everything. A camper had reported a suspicious figure moving through the trees, a man with bloodshot eyes and a rifle slung over his shoulder. When officers arrived and called out for him to surrender, the man turned, raised his weapon, and aimed. It was Richard Matt. The forest fell silent. And in that silence, the long hunt for freedom turned into a deadly confrontation. The price of freedom. The last week of June 2015 began with gunfire echoing through the misty woods of Malone, New York. After 23 days on the run, the two most wanted men in America, Richard Matt and David Sweat, had finally been cornered. The manhunt had consumed the state. Thousands of officers, hundreds of miles of forest, millions of taxpayer dollars. And now, the end had come in a burst of violence. The call came in just after 3:30 p.m. on June 26. A border patrol team had spotted movement along a remote logging road near Titusville Mountain. One of the agents raised his binoculars and froze. Through the trees, a figure was stumbling, clutching a shotgun. The man was unshaven, sunburned, and exhausted, but unmistakable. It was Richard Matt. When officers called out for him to drop his weapon, Matt turned instead. He raised the shotgun. The command came instantly. Fire. 3 shots cracked through the humid air. When the smoke cleared, Richard Matt, the artist, the manipulator, the man who had charmed his way out of a maximum security prison, was dead. News of his death broke within minutes. Cameras rolled, headlines blared. One fugitive down, one still on the run. But David Sweat was nowhere to be found. Sweat had split from Matt days earlier, realizing that the older man had become reckless, drinking, leaving trails, ignoring caution. Sweat, ever the planner, had decided to move alone. He wanted to reach the Canadian border, less than 10 miles away. Freedom was so close he could almost taste it. But the state wasn't taking any chances. Helicopters circled. Officers combed every road, ditch, and field. The forest was no longer his friend, it was closing in on him. 2 days later, on June 28, a patrol sergeant named Jay Cook was cruising down a lonely rural road near Constable, New York. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw movement, a man dressed in camouflage jogging along a tree line. Cook stopped his vehicle, stepped out quietly, and called, "Hey! Come here a second." The man froze. His clothes were torn, his boots shredded, his face covered in mud. It was him. David Sweat. Sweat turned and bolted toward the woods. Cook shouted again, "Stop! State police!" He didn't. With the border less than 2 miles away, Sweat sprinted toward the trees, desperate. But the officer raised his weapon and fired. The bullet tore through his shoulder and exited his torso. He fell, rolling through the grass, screaming in pain. Backup arrived moments later. The chase, the myth, was over. When they carried Sweat into custody, reporters swarmed. Cameras flashed as he was loaded into an ambulance, blood on his shirt and fear in his eyes. His first words to investigators were chilling in their simplicity. "We just wanted to feel the air. To feel free." That single sentence summed up 3 weeks of chaos, a state's sleepless nights, and the unraveling of one of the most secure prisons in America. Inside the Clinton Correctional Facility, heads rolled. Internal affairs investigations revealed a network of complacency, manipulation, and negligence. Guards had ignored warning signs. Security protocols had been bypassed for years. Joyce, Tilly, Mitchell faced the consequences too. In court, she sat trembling as prosecutors read the charges. Her once cheerful demeanor was gone. She pleaded guilty to promoting prison contraband and facilitating escape. The judge called her a disgrace to her position. When given a chance to speak, her voice cracked. "If I could take it back, I would. I lost everything, my job, my friends, my freedom." She was sentenced to 2 to 7 years in prison. But even that didn't silence the fascination surrounding the case. People across the country debated whether Tilly had truly been in love, or just a pawn in Matt and Sweat's game. Interviews with other inmates revealed that Matt had been bragging about using her for months before the escape. To him, she was never a partner, just another tool to carve through steel. As for Sweat, he was transferred to a high-security federal facility, locked away in near-total isolation. No windows, no freedom, no human contact. He later told investigators every detail, how they mapped the tunnels, how they used power tools at night while guards slept, how Tilly smuggled in meat filled with blades. He even admitted that they had planned to kill her once they were out, to eliminate any witnesses. The betrayal ran full circle. What started as a fantasy of freedom became a chain of lies, death, and ruined lives. Years later, the story still haunts Dannemora. Locals talk about it in hushed tones, how the sirens never seemed to stop, how the woods felt cursed that summer. The prison reinforced every wall, added hundreds of cameras, and rewrote entire security protocols. But no one could erase what happened. The myth of the real-life Shawshank became a cautionary tale, a reminder that sometimes, the walls don't fail because they're weak. They fail because someone on the inside wants them to. And for Joyce Mitchell, Richard Matt, and David Sweat, the dream of freedom ended the same way it began, in deception and blood. When asked years later if he regretted escaping, Sweat gave a thin smile and whispered, "For 23 days, I wasn't a prisoner." He looked down, chained, escorted back to his cell. That was enough. If you thought this story was wild, wait till you hear the next one. Because sometimes, the most dangerous place isn't outside the walls, it's inside them. Hit subscribe, and don't miss what's coming next.